You ever played a game you just couldn't forget? No matter what new game came out, something about this one always drew you back in. Was it the characters, the story, the art style, or was it simply how the game made you feel once it was all over and the credits began to roll? For me, it was Hotline Miami 1 and 2. Hotline Miami is a top-down shooter released in 2012 by Dennaton Games, comprised of Swedish duo Jonathan Soderstrom and Dennis Whedon. It was an instant smash hit, with praise given to its tight and punishing yet rewarding gameplay, soundtrack and general aesthetic as well. Players couldn't get enough of it, and suddenly Hotline Miami was a widely influential indie game that was being heralded as possibly one of the best games of all time. While I'm heavily biased, I'm inclined to agree. Hotline Miami scratches the perfect itch in my mind of fast-paced gameplay that is frustrating but motivational in its frustration as it eggs you on to keep going and complete the level. Hotline Miami's gameplay is insanely fun, but this gameplay, united with its narrative themes, is more than just a hyper-violent release. Soderstrom said he wanted to make a game more geared toward adults, so the themes and ideas presented in these games are more adult as well. This video will explore my own personal experience with Hotline Miami and its sequel, Wrong Number, and coming to understand the game's themes, ideas, and narrative, and what I took away from them both as a kid and as an adult. I won't be going over the story in detail, just what was important to my experience. It may have taken me nearly 10 years to put into words how these games made me feel, and despite these games being written about to death in videos by people who did a far better job than I ever could, I simply can't let these thoughts and feelings go. Hotline Miami tells its story through a seemingly disjointed and admittedly pretty confusing lens as well. It's meant to confuse the player, but most players, when met with that confusion, opted to not care about the story and just partake in the gameplay. Hotline Miami follows a silent protagonist dubbed Jacket by the fanbase, who receives coded messages on his answering machine disguised as normal phone calls that lead him to various hotspots with the Russian mafia. Jacket will don one of many animal masks, enter the building, and proceed to massacre every Russian inside with no remorse. I first played Hotline Miami when I was 15, and at the time, admittedly, I was far too stupid to even begin to comprehend the themes and ideas that the game was trying to tell me. I may have been a high-achieving English student at the time, sure, but something about this game I just did not get. Partly because I didn't take the time or even care all too much to try and get it. You know, all I wanted to play was this new game I got. I didn't care about the characters and the story and all that, I just wanted to get to it. But even as someone who wasn't thinking about the story, God forbid the meta-narrative of the game, the way the game is designed kind of forced me to partake in the metafiction aspect of the game without me even really knowing it. From the beginning, Hotline Miami makes it clear that you are not privy to information that will come to be important. At the start, Jacket is approached by three figures wearing animal masks in a dark room: a horse, an owl, and a rooster. They talk to Jacket as if they know everything about him and that he doesn't know himself. And maybe that it's better that way, because knowing oneself means acknowledging one's actions. This introduction is uneasy. You don't know where you are, what they're talking about, or what the point of it all is. But you can quickly cast this feeling of unease to the side as you jump right into the first level. I remember playing as a kid and just pushing this whole conversation to the side and forgetting it even happened just so I could indulge myself into the flashy hyperviolence. But as I played, something didn't feel right. I was uneasy and anxious. Something about the game was making me uptight, and I couldn't pin down exactly what it was. Maybe it's all the subtleties that the game tries to present to you to clue you into the fact that all is not what it seems, but at 15 all these subtleties were flying over my fucking head. Even with all the themes going completely over my head, something was still wrong about the game that I was playing. You know, maybe it was the context in which I was playing the game. I vividly remember it as well. I had just dumped all this instant coffee into a mug and drank it straight. No milk, no sugar, nothing. I was on holidays from school, it was the middle of the night, the whole house was asleep, and here I was in my room playing this brand new game I got, having my heart rate accelerate rapidly on account of the inhuman amount of caffeine in my system probably, mixed with the visceral gameplay, the bright neon visuals, and the thumping soundtrack. I'm not gonna lie, man, I thought I was on the verge of having a fucking heart attack at 15. The gameplay mixed with the soundtrack just fills you with adrenaline. You'll be running through levels with wild abandon, ramming through doors, bludgeoning and slicing Russians as geysers of blood erupt from them. You can sometimes see enemies squirm and writhe in pain as they slowly die on account of what you did to them. But most times you won't have the time to stop and see this as you play as fast and relentlessly as possible to keep the combo up, rack up more points and get a better ranking. You'll be approaching the peak of adrenaline as you dodge gunfire and kite Russians around, and just as you reach that peak, the level is over. The music stops. There's nothing else to do here. Time to go. The most uncomfortable part of Hotline Miami is the walk back to the car after you complete the level. It's a defining feature in both games as it serves a grim and depressing reminder about what you're actually doing in these games. The bloodshed, the scattered weapons and the empty guns, all of it you have to look at as you walk back through the massacre you've created. The music shifts from its invigorating synthwave to this eerie, low droning sound that fills you with a sense of dread and anxiety. I remember experiencing this for the first time and feeling frantic, like I'd just done something wrong. Of course, I was a bit on edge from the insane amount of caffeine, but the point still stands, it's an extremely jarring experience. The purpose of the walk back to the car is to serve the overall meta-narrative at play. Soderstrom said in an interview, "I remember when we decided that you were supposed to walk the whole way back to the car. The music is cut, the combos are over, the points on the screen aren't there anymore. It's just you and the bodies. That's when it really clicked for us, the whole meta thing. From that point on, I think it was very clear to us what kind of game we wanted to make." Even as a 15-year-old who just wanted to consume violent media and violent video games on account of them being really foreign to me and me only really just getting access to them, the walk back to the car still achieved its goal of making me feel uptight and anxious. This anxiousness, however, was me partaking in the meta-narrative that Hotline Miami was trying to tell, even if I didn't fully understand it. Ignorant is what I was. Ignorant to the meta-narrative, and ignorant to the way I was feeling the way I was, and ignorant to the overall message that the game was trying to convey. Hotline Miami 2, Wrong Number, released in 2015, and wasn't received with the same praise as the first one. It was viewed as a disappointing sequel that couldn't justify its own existence, as a lot of people viewed its gameplay and level design as far worse than what it was in Hotline Miami 1. You can find countless threads online of people complaining about how unfair Hotline Miami 2's level design is, some even stating that it feels like the game doesn't want you to finish it due to how unfair it is. Hotline Miami 2 is totally different to the first one. The levels are far bigger and have way more enemies in them, the music is louder and way more expressive, and the story is even more prevalent this time. But the violence is just as over the top as before. I played Hotline Miami 2 pretty much straight after I finished the first one, and I totally fell in love with it. As Ovando said in his fantastic video about the game, it takes the violence of the first game and pushes it to an uncomfortable extreme. And uncomfortable is right. If the walk back to the car in the first game wasn't uncomfortable enough for you, Hotline Miami 2 makes sure to beat you over the head with its uncomfortableness. Literally. However, I was still 15, so therefore I was still fucking stupid, and I wasn't coming any closer to understanding the game's themes, ideas, or beginning to try and understand the metafiction aspects of it as well. But with how much more direct Hotline Miami 2 is in getting you to engage with its metafiction aspects, I was coming close. Hotline Miami 2 shows the aftermath of what Jacket did in the first game, from a variety of different angles. Jacket single-handedly wiped out the Russian mafia in Miami, and some idolize him and praise him as a hero, some view him as a violent psychopath, and others view him as the greatest enemy. There were 12 playable protagonists in Hotline Miami 2. The fans, consisting of Corey, Tony, Alex and Ash, and Mark, who idolize Jacket and his actions and seek to try and replicate what he did in his honor. Martin Brown, an actor playing the leading role in Midnight Animal, an in-universe movie retelling the events of Hotline Miami 1. Manny Pardo, a detective with a propensity to bend the rules of the law and a secret to hide. Jake, an ultranationalist loser who wants to keep America pure and kick the Russians out. Evan Wright, a writer seeking the truth around what really happened in Hotline Miami 1. The henchman, a member of the Russian mafia seeking to exit it as soon as possible. Beard, a special forces soldier who served in the Soviet-American War in Hawaii. Richter, a loner who wants to take care of his mother but is forced to commit the same acts as Jacket did. And the son, the new head of the Russian mafia seeking to rebuild it to make his late father proud. However, you know, I didn't fucking care. At 15, I didn't care. I didn't care who was what, who wanted to do what, or who viewed what as what. I just wanted to get into the game and play it. The story, once again, didn't matter to me, despite how much more prevalent it is in the sequel. At this point, I was pretty desensitized to violence in video games, and I thought, no matter what, no matter how gruesome it is, any violence is not going to affect me, and I'm just gonna have fun in this violent video game. But then the ending of Chapter 2 happened, and something really didn't feel right this time. In Level 8, Execution, the level opens on the henchman, locked in a room at a club. He's overdosing on the new experimental drug concocted by the remaining Russian mafia and trying to call his girlfriend who had just left him that morning. But you're not playing as the henchman, you're playing as the fans. As they roll up to the club, you barge in and massacre everyone inside, as usual. But on your way out, you see the rest of the group has barged into the locked room where the henchman is clearly tripping out of his mind, calling out for his girlfriend, asking just to go home. Instead, the fans brutally beat him to death, as he can't even process what's happening. You can even still see him breathing just before the finishing blows landed. The concept of death in the Hotline Miami games is treated more as something to just shrug off. You slaughter countless people as if it were nothing. Dying yourself really doesn't even set you back that far, and one of the gameplay tips that Hotline Miami 1 gives you is don't be afraid of dying. But even then, watching this scene where the henchman is brutally executed is sickening, which is ironic to say as he's literally no different to the Russians I killed in Hotline Miami 1, and he's not any different to the people I massacred through on the same building 20 seconds prior. But this is different, as not only is this a playable character, you also get some backstory on him, and you can't do anything about his death. You can't restart to try again, and you can't prevent it. You just have to sit there and watch. When I first saw this at 15, I distinctly remember a pit forming in my stomach. It didn't feel right. You know, I completed the level. I did what the game told me to do. I even got a good ranking. So why does it feel like I did something wrong by playing? That feeling of anxiousness and unease had returned. But this isn't even the first time something like this happens in Hotline Miami 2. At the end of Chapter 1, Martin Brown is killed on set in a freak accident where a prop gun is loaded with live bullets, and the same thing happens there. You can't do anything about it. You just have to sit there and watch. Characters are killed consistently in Hotline Miami 2, so you never get the chance to shake off that feeling of anxiousness or unease. The pressure is always on. But even then, I still didn't partake in the story of the game. I just liked the fact that there were more levels for me to indulge myself in this hyperviolence. So, while I felt like I was doing something wrong, the steady stream of combos and points and S ranks kept me feeling accomplished all the way to the end. But when I came to the ending of Hotline Miami 2, that feeling of anxiousness and discomfort had skyrocketed, and I couldn't understand why it was happening. But I finished it. I finished Hotline Miami 2 in 2015, and continuously replayed it in the years that followed, usually only just hopping in to play my favorite levels, never really doing a full playthrough. But recently replaying the whole game again at 24, something about it hit me really hard. You'll have noticed in the last two parts I didn't really explore the games too in depth, only surface level observations that really anyone could have made. This is because that's how I viewed the games when I first played them, surface level without any real thought to the deeper meaning, just focusing on the violent nature of the game. I've danced around the words meta-narrative and metafiction the entire video, so maybe it's time to talk about what it actually is. Meta-narrative in traditional literature seems to have a vastly different definition in comparison to video games. When we talk about meta-narrative in video games, it's largely referring to metafiction, which is self-conscious literature in which the narrator or characters are aware that they are part of a work of fiction. So when we talk about video games being meta, we largely refer to video games that talk to the player directly in an attempt to comment about concepts and ideas. Games like Undertale, Spec Ops: The Line, and The Stanley Parable are all common examples of metafiction type games. They appeal to the player directly and make them either aware of the fictionality of the game and its story, or talk directly to the player to have them question themselves as real people. Hotline Miami 1 and 2 are metafiction type games that talk to the player directly in an attempt to get them to think about their own morals, ethics, and identity. Hotline Miami 1 is a critique on violent media and how ready we are to consume that violent media and try and alter our perception on fictional violence as well. When I mentioned earlier that something about the game didn't feel right, not only is that part of the reveal of the game, but it's also the metafiction aspect of the game in motion as well. In the second part of the game, Jacket meets with the three figures again, where the rooster, who we should probably just start calling Richard, will ask Jacket 4 questions. Do you like hurting other people? Who is leaving messages on your answering machine? Where are we right now? And why are we having this conversation? These questions are aimed mainly at Jacket, those last three in particular, but that first one is really aimed directly at the player. At the heart of all of this ultra-violent romp through Miami, do you enjoy causing all this bloodshed? By this point you've killed at least 52 people in the levels you played, so now the game is asking you, did you enjoy killing those people? It's trying to get you to review your own moral compass and make you think about why you might even like playing violent video games in the first place. Obviously, for a lot of people, myself included, the reason why we play violent video games is that they're usually really fucking fun. It's a chance to do something that you will hopefully never commit in real life. But then the question arises, why do you enjoy the idea of killing people in the first place? As well as that, have you ever really taken the time or been given the time to realize what you're doing in these violent games is awful? The question, do you like hurting other people in Hotline Miami, is one that provokes the player to look inside themselves and understand why they might play these games at all. It asks you a question but takes away your ability to answer, as it already assumes the answer is yes based on the fact that you have been, and likely will continue to play the game. Personally, Hotline Miami 1 was trying to remind me that even though it's fictional violence, that real world violence still needs to be treated with the weight and gravity that it deserves. Playing through it again at 24 is a totally different experience than playing through it at 15. At 15 I was desensitized to violence, and even though subconsciously the game was fucking me up, I didn't really care. I just wanted to keep playing and keep indulging in that violence. But at 24, I can understand why the game makes me feel that way, and I can understand its critique on violent media and violent video games. Hotline Miami 2 is totally different, however. It's a brutal and unforgiving experience that seeks to not only remind you that the violent acts you're committing in these games are awful, but also punish you for it. If Hotline Miami 1's critique on violence in media, Hotline Miami 2 shows you the consequence of that violence and also remind you about the brutalities of life as well. Like I said, Hotline Miami 2 is not afraid to kill characters off, and at 15, I was pretty pissed with the game for doing that. You know, specifically, the ending of level 12, Death Wish, I had just unlocked all the fans and I loved playing as each of them individually, and now they're all fucking dead. Every character death made me anxious because I couldn't understand their reasoning as to why they were dying. Like most people, I thought it was just the developers trying to make people mad for the sake of it and giving one last big middle finger to those who wanted more Hotline Miami. To me, their deaths were fucking pointless. By the end of the game, only 3 of the playable 12 characters are even alive. At 24, I've come to my own interpretation and realization of why these deaths were happening. The community consensus is that these deaths are the consequence of continually escalating violence. Death and destruction will only bring about more death and destruction, and misguided idealism and ideals results in poor decisions and devastating results. Hotline Miami 2 seeks to show you the consequences of violence by killing characters you play as to show you that no one is safe. Hotline Miami, for all it did in trying to get you to face the consequences of violence, fell somewhat flat because you, the player, never suffered any real consequence for it. That consequence, obviously, is death. Death is the consequence of violence, and escalating that violence will only result in more death. Hotline Miami 2 shows me that violence is a game where no one wins. But Hotline Miami 2 also made me confront the concept of death head on and come to terms with it. Death has always been a difficult concept for me. I've been dealing with it since I was 9 years old. I distinctly remember watching my mom and my brother play SingStar for the PS2, and my mom was singing Evanescence's Bring Me to Life. And I can't for the life of me remember why, but in that moment I realized that one day my mom was going to die, as well as my dad and my brother and me. 9 years old. 9 fucking years old, and I was already being hit with the full existentialism of life. Fuck me. When I was 13, my auntie died of cancer, and I had a lot of trouble understanding that she was gone forever. I would never see her again, and it didn't feel fair, especially considering how important she was to me. At 18, graduating high school, it was overwhelming to know that this was the beginning of the rest of my life, and that at the end of it all, I would be dead. On my 21st birthday, I couldn't really enjoy it or celebrate it because I realized that not only was I getting older, but everyone around me was getting older as well. My family would die before me, and I would be left without them. And that terrified me. The thought of losing my mom and my dad and my brother filled me with such an immense grief that I just had to hide because I didn't want to appear sad on my birthday. And I've had this happen every birthday since. Most recently, I was crying in the bathrooms at work because I had just realized out of nowhere that everyone I'd cared about was going to die one day. I had a tough time accepting that myself and the people I care about will one day no longer be alive. It is a genuinely scary thought, and the fact that I've been dealing with this since I was 9 years old really puts a lot of my life into perspective for me. But in playing through Hotline Miami 2 again fully at 24, it taught me something that made this whole thing way easier to deal with. It's time to talk about Hotline Miami 2's ending. The finale of Hotline Miami 2 takes place in Hawaii, where Richter has escaped and managed to get his mother out as well, finally free from the constant violence and death of Miami. As they enjoy the calm, the TV suddenly flashes with static, turning to an emergency broadcast where it's revealed that both the Russian and American presidents have been killed in a coup d'etat. It's said that Russia will likely see this as an act of war, and the repercussions may be severe. Richard will then appeal to Richter, telling him that the good times never last, and that it will all be over soon. Richter accepts that there's nothing he can do to change what's about to happen, so there's no need to fight it. Richard will then say, "Leaving this world is not as scary as it sounds," right before Hawaii and Miami are nuked, and all the remaining characters are reduced to ash in the atomic blast. When I said 3 of the 12 characters are left alive by the end, I lied. No one survives. This whole ending sequence is Richter coming to terms with the fact that he cannot escape the inevitable. In-game, it's Richter accepting that he can't escape the impending doom, and metafictionally, it's telling the player that the game is over. This is it. This is the ending, and you can't change that. You just have to accept that all these characters die, and it's pointless to try and find another way out, because this is the way it is. At the end of it all, it's the consequences of your actions, but it's also showing you that there are things outside of your control that you can't do anything about. Whether it be people in high power doing things behind the scenes that you will never know about, or just a natural part of life itself, there are things that you cannot escape. You just need to sit back and accept it. And I find it funny how, when the game first released, you could find endless threads of people theory crafting how Jacket may have survived the nuke, therefore we'd get Hotline Miami 3. Dude, the walls of the cell that Jacket was in may have been strong enough to survive the nuke. We might actually get Hotline Miami 3. Or my favorite one, dude, Jacket's in Payday 2 as a playable character. That means he's alive and we can get we can get Hotline Miami 3. And just other countless fucking bullshit theories that held no water, because the final shot of the game is Jacket getting obliterated in a blast. People were desperately trying to avoid the ending because they didn't want it to be over. despite being told in that ending, the good times never last. There are a lot of themes in Hotline Miami 1 and 2, but the theme of death is one that really stuck with me the most. Death in Hotline Miami 1 is treated as something to just forget about. If you die, you can restart. It doesn't matter. Death doesn't matter. It's just, you're gonna die, so why should we make a big song and dance about it? Just restart and try again. Who cares? But in Hotline Miami 2, this ending where all the characters are killed pissed me off when I was 15. Despite the fact that I knew I could just start the game over again, at the end of it, I knew everyone was going to die. I didn't want it to be over. I didn't realize that you could view Hotline Miami 2 as an allegory for accepting death, because at the time, I myself could not accept death. But experiencing this ending again at 24 was totally different to me. It taught me that no matter what, no matter who you are, how you live your life, or how important you think you are, at the end of it all, you're going to die. It's inevitable, and you can't change that. And that comforted me, in a way. Maybe I shouldn't be spending all this time afraid of the end, because I don't know when the end will happen. And furthermore, I can't do anything to change it when it does happen. Maybe I should just be enjoying the good times before they're over, and when death finally does come for me, just to sit back and accept it. Because I can't fight it. In the end, the biggest thing I took away from Hotline Miami was, don't be afraid of dying. Because it really isn't as scary as it sounds.